In this video, I will discuss the two most important classical composers that composed opera, and we will also have a look at Beethoven's history and some of his compositions. Now, if you look at your workbook, you see assignment 51. From Gluck's opera Orfeo et Eurydice, listen to Orpheus' aria, Che farò, usually translated, what is life to me without thee? What qualities are there in this aria, both in the melody and the orchestral accompaniment, which identify this music as being classical in style rather than Baroque? So you're going to look at the characteristics of classical music in order to answer that. Now let's start here with opera. Although classical composers wrote a great deal for the church, in vocal music it was opera that attracted most interest. The two greatest opera composers of the period were Gluck and Mozart. So Gluck, 1714 to 1787, he was one of the several composers and critics who were concerned that opera was becoming too stilted, too stereotyped. Singers had taken on such importance that the music was often composed to suit them rather than the story. So the story, he was concerned that the story was not important, that the soloists and the singers were more important than the story, with the result that the actions was frequently held up while singers were allowed to show off their technical brilliance. Gluck decided it was time for this to change. He first put his ideas into practice on Orfeo et Eurydice. Now that is your work for this week. His best known opera, which was performed in Vienna in 1762. This made use of the same Greek legend as Monteverdi's Orfeo, composed in 1607. We know that when we discussed Baroque opera, that they used a lot of fantasy and gods, fairies. So again, we have a topic as a Greek legend. Then 5 years later, in a printed preface to his opera Alceste, Gluck explained his idea of what an opera should be. The music should serve the story while still reflecting the drama and emotion of the poetry. So the story, he felt, was very important. There should be less distinction between aria and recitative, and the action should be more continuous, avoiding interruptions merely for vocal display at the demands of the singers. Now that happened a lot in the Baroque era. Instruments should be chosen and used to suit each situation in the story, and the overture should prepare the audience for the nature of the drama which was to follow. So when you answer assignment 51, it's very important that you know your main characteristics of classical music. Number 1, lighter, clearer texture than Baroque, less complicated, mainly homophonic. So listen whether you hear a melody and chordal accompaniment. An emphasis on grace and beauty of melody and form, proportion and balance, moderation and control, polished and elegant in character, with expressiveness and formal structure held in perfect balance. So the balance between emotion and technique, the grace, the beauty, all those things, listen for that. Number 3, more variety and contrast within a piece. The keys, the tunes, the rhythms and dynamics. So listen whether you hear crescendo, sforzando, the accents, frequent changes of mood and timbre. Now in the Baroque we only had one mood. Listen whether you hear different moods, different key changes, different timbres. I get timbres, different timbres, if I use different instruments. Melodies tend to be shorter than those of the Baroque. You remember in the Baroque time, we had a long line. Now here we have clear-cut phrases and clearly marked cadences. The orchestra increases in size and range. Harpsichord continue falls out of use and woodwind becomes a self-contained section. So listen whether you hear the woodwinds maybe playing little solos. Whether you hear a bigger orchestra and whether we hear the absence or no harpsichord in the music. Harpsichord replaced by the piano. Now, if this is an opera, I will not hear the piano. Okay, that is just in general. Early piano music, thinnish in texture, often with Alberti bass accompaniment, Haydn and Mozart, but later becoming richer, more sonorous and powerful, Beethoven. Importance given to instrumental music. That's also now in general because we're talking about opera now. So number 7, main kinds. The sonata we know the trio, the string quartet we've listened to, we've done the symphony, we've done the concerto, a serenade, and a divertimento. So those are the forms that we had. Sonata form, the most important design, used to build up the first movement of most of the large-scale works, but also the other movements can be in sonata form. And we also have single pieces such as the overtures. So when you do assignment 51, go through the main characteristics and see whether you can work that into your answer. In our other classwork, we have done Mozart. We've listened to his operas. We've listened to some of his small works. And let's see there, 1756 to 1791. It has been suggested that whereas Gluck reformed opera, Mozart transformed it by his musical genius and dramatic instinct. His 3 greatest operas are The Marriage of Figaro, Don Giovanni, and The Magic Flute. We've done The Magic Flute, which is a Singspiel, a type of opera in which singing is interspersed with spoken dialogue. These operas show Mozart's keen observation of human nature, which enables him to bring life and warmth to his characters. So he makes the characters believable. Arias, while deepening our understanding of a character, often help to carry the story forward. Mozart makes the final scenes of an act into an elaborate structure during which all the characters join in an ensemble. So ensemble meaning together, everyone singing at once, but with each character voicing his or her own reaction to the situation which has come about. The orchestra in a Mozart opera plays an important part in the unfolding of the story, mirroring the mood and drama of the action and adding interest detail, but always enhancing rather than diminishing the importance of the voices. So again, the balance there, more importance to the voices. Assignment 52, we're also going to do. Find out about the story of Mozart's opera buffa, Don Giovanni. Then listen to Leporello's catalogue area in which he gives an account of his master's many previous loves. Okay, so he's got a little black book and he sings about this black book. Which type of voice sings this aria? And how does Mozart bring a light-hearted, joking mood to this aria? So how does he work in this joking mood? Do I hear that in the instruments? Do I hear that in the melody? Look at the actions, look at the drama on stage, and I think that will help you with your answer here. You also have another assignment on Ludwig van Beethoven, but let's work through your classwork. 1770 to 1827. Beethoven is a massive figure in the history of music. Like Monteverdi, 2 centuries earlier he strides across 2 eras. He has been described as the last of the classical composers and at the same time the first of the romantics. Unlike most composers before him, Beethoven did not write music to please a wealthy patron. He composed in order to please himself. It is usual to divide Beethoven's life and work into 3 periods because he was influenced by a lot of people around him. The first, showing the influence of Haydn and Mozart, includes the first 2 symphonies, the first 3 piano concertos, the first 6 string quartets, and the first dozen or so of his 32 piano sonatas. By the time Beethoven had written these works, he was turning 30 and had already noticed the signs of approaching deafness. The works of the second period are written in a more individual, personal style, on a grander scale and with greater depths of feeling. To this middle period belong the third and the eighth symphonies, the fourth and the fifth piano concertos, and the violin concertos, the three Razumovsky string quartets, the Moonlight, the Waldstein, and the Appassionata piano sonatas, and Beethoven's only opera. He only composed one opera, Fidelio. So in the second period, what you have to remember, it's a more individual and a personal style. The first one showed the influence of Haydn and Mozart. To the third period belong the ninth symphony. So with the choral symphony, the Mass in D, and the last string quartets and the sonatas. During the last period, Beethoven's deafness became total, completely cutting him off from the world of sound, except in his imagination. Taking classical forms used by Haydn and Mozart, Beethoven modified and expanded them, so he made them bigger. His works tend to be weightier on a much larger scale. So this is now the end of classical music. It's turning into the Romantic era. In the development section of a sonata form movement, he makes a more searching exploration of the ideas chosen for discussion. He gives the coda greater importance, sometimes continuing to explore material in such a way that it amounts to a second development section. So he expands things now. Slow movements portray a deeper emotional intensity. The minuet becomes transformed into a brisk and vigorous scherzo, and more weight and importance is given to a final movement to balance the first. Drama and conflict are essential ingredients in Beethoven's style, and that makes him a little bit different from Mozart and Haydn. They had more balance in their work, stemming from a powerful, often violent, rhythmic drive and sharper use of discords, frequently marked sforzandos, forcing the tone, and striking contrast of timbres, pitches, dynamics. During a crescendo, when the loudest chord is expected, he will often take the listener by surprise by making a sudden drop to piano. Beethoven increased the size of the orchestra to that used by Haydn in his last symphony. He adds a third horn in the third symphony, a piccolo, double bassoon, and 3 trombones in his work. These instruments are used again in his choral symphony, which also includes solo voices and mixed choruses. So he expanded a lot of things. He also added instruments to the orchestra. Bass drums, cymbals, and triangle are added to the percussion section, and the number of horns is increased to 4. So he made a lot of changes. He added drama, conflict, rhythmical drive. So this sounds like the beginning of the Romantic era. Now assignment 53, listen to a work by Beethoven, such as his Appassionata piano sonata, or his 3rd or 5th symphony. Compare the music with a work that you have listened to by composed by Haydn or Mozart, pointing out some of the differences in style and impact. So this assignment 53, you really have to compare the two groups of composers. You can decide on whether you want to take a Haydn work or a Mozart work, and then compare that with a Beethoven work. So I would suggest taking one of the sonatas so that you can concentrate on only one instrument, and then taking a symphony so that you can hear and see maybe a bigger orchestra, listen to the impact and the drama and the conflict, and compare that with a Haydn and Mozart. So this is the end of our classical videos now, on the classical era, and work through your assignment 51, 52, and 53.